And those are the first level effects. And then people begin to starve. And then you have refugee crises. People leave the cities looking for food. And then, yes, they move into other countries. In the region, in Europe, in the United States, you cause chaos and death, mass suffering and death when you do that. And we have done that. We have intentionally bombed civilian infrastructure in Iran. It's totally unacceptable. Not under the phony laws of some international body, but under moral law, God's law, killing non-combatants, people who did nothing wrong, who didn't choose this war, who were just people created by God. That is immoral. That will never be moral. That can never be justified. That is always wrong. It can be expedient. We need to do this. It doesn't mean it's right. It's the most wrong thing. And we should always remember that what we do will be done to us. Live by the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Live by the killing of children, the bombing of elementary schools and colleges. And you will die, and your children will die by those same things. That's just a fact. That's never not been true. We don't want it to be true. It's the last thing we want to be true, but it is nonetheless true. And everyone knows that on an animal level. You can feel that that's true. Ooh, shouldn't do that. You'll be punished for it in this life or the next, or maybe both. For the president to say that and not bother to tell us, oh, it was an accident we did this? Well, one, it makes you reassess the bombing of the girls' school attached to the IRGC naval base, where the children of Iranian military officers were incinerated in a bombing, not one but two, a double tap. Every person has assumed that was a mistake. No American could ever believe the U.S. government would do that on purpose. I still don't believe it. But after this, you have to kind of wonder, how did that happen? Was it bad targeting, coordinates given to us, we hope, by Israel, another country? Maybe it wasn't. Who knows at this point? For the president to call for that, it's worth stopping and saying, no, this is not acceptable under any circumstances. You haven't justified it. You couldn't justify it. And it can't be done in our name. And the point, of course, is to get the Iranians to open the Strait of Hormuz. Well, no sane person thinks that's going to work. At which point you have to ask, why would we do it anyway? Well, there are a bunch of possible reasons, but the darkest of all is for the sake of doing it. For the sake of killing, for the sake of exercising the most obvious form of power, which is extinguishing life. That's why we're doing it. The thrill is in the killing. The power is in the killing. The exertion of force is the point. You don't want to think that. But after a message like this, what could possibly be the reason? There's nobody who thinks that if we do this, and we pray we don't, for our sake as well as the sake of non-combatant innocent Iranians, nobody thinks this is going to work. But then the tweet continues. Pardon me, the ironically named truth continues. There will be nothing like it. Open the effing strait. How dare you speak that way on Easter morning to the country? Who do you think you are? You're tweeting out the F word on Easter morning? You'll be living in hell. As if hell is a place. Hell is a condition. And this is an example of that condition. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. So obviously you're mocking the religion of Iran. Okay. If you seek a religious war, that's a good idea. But by the way, no decent person mocks other people's religions. You may have a problem with the theology. Presumably you do if it's not your religion, and you can explain what that is. But to mock other people's faith is to mock the idea of faith itself. And we should never mock that, because at its core is the acknowledgement that we are not in charge of the universe. We did not build it. We won't be here at the end of it. We can destroy life. We cannot create it because we are not God. The message of all faith at the biggest picture level is the message in our Bible, which is you are not God. And only if you think you are do you talk this way. But it's not just mockery of Islam. And no president should mock Islam. That's not your job. This is not a theocracy. We don't go to war with other theocracies to find out which theocracy is more effective. We are not a theocracy. And God willing, we never will be, because theocracies corrupt the religion. No, this is a mockery not just of Islam, it's a mockery of Christianity. To send out a tweet with the F word on Easter morning promising the murder of civilians and then saying praise be to Allah without explaining any of it, you are mocking me and every other Christian because we're Christians. Oh, I get it. We can't support that. Under no circumstances can we support that. Doesn't mean you have to hate Trump or take the opposite position on every issue from Trump. You shouldn't. A lot of his positions are the right positions, but you cannot support that. That is evil. That is an intentional desecration of beauty and truth, which is the definition of evil. And you have to ask, where does evil lead? If the core point of evil is to destroy, which it is, God creates, Satan destroys. It's dualism. When you see something of beauty being created, when you hear the truth being spoken, you are witnessing a manifestation of God's power. And when you see the opposite, you're witnessing the opposite. So where does this lead? Well, on a practical level and a spiritual level, they converge in the same place, which is the use of weapons of mass destruction. So on a practical level, on a strategic level, if you're at the Pentagon gaming this out, like, how does this work? The President of the United States keeps laying down markers. You can't go past next Tuesday at 2 p.m. or whatever. You must open the strait, or else you'll be living in hell, as if we're not there already. And at a certain point, what we're doing is revealing that we've exhausted conventional power. If there's some tricky way to open the Strait of Hormuz by air, probably would have done it by now, because we are on a path to plunge the world into global depression and famine. And that's not hair on fire panicanism. That's math. 30% of the world's fertilizer, 20% of its energy? Yeah, that's a global depression and famine. What happens to Africa? 1.5 billion sub-Saharan Africans without enough fertilizer? Well, a lot of them will be living in the United States. It's just going to happen. It's right across the Atlantic Ocean. Check a map. So getting the strait open is the essence of the mission. It is the strategic goal. By the way, not to be bitter, it was open on February 27th and had been for, since there were pirates roaming the strait. For modern history, it had been open. Now it's closed because of this war. Okay, so there's that. But leave that aside. Okay, that was then. How do we get it open? Conventional airstrikes will not open the strait for very obvious reasons. You can close it with mines. So if you reach the end of your conventional power, where does that leave you? Oh, with non-conventional power. What's that a euphemism for? Nuclear weapons. And the effects of that hardly need to be explained. Well, they can't be fully known because modern nuclear weapons have never been used. But you can just draw obvious conclusions, like life in Iran, not possible. So you wipe out a country of 92 million people. What about directly across the Persian Gulf? What about the 7 other countries, all of them allies of the United States, the biggest oil-producing countries in the world? Could you live there? What about the 100-odd million people who live in those countries? Maybe not possible for them either. Would a nuclear strike be followed by peace? Probably not. The U.S. isn't the only country in the world with nuclear weapons. You could have a global nuclear war. That's why we haven't used nuclear weapons in 80 years. No one has. Because you don't know where it goes from there. This is insane, okay? This is insane. It's hard to believe you even need to say this out loud. Oh, but you do. Because all things being equal, that's where we're heading. And how do we know that? Well, there are a million signs, but the most obvious is the dumbest neocons in Trump's orbit are saying it out loud. Now, in some cases, you don't even want to mention their names because these are not decision makers. These people are very much like Jeffrey Epstein. They're not actually the evil mastermind. Jeffrey Epstein's kind of an idiot. He's an employee, obviously. He's a communications hub. He's to get the message out to your people. And it's the same with America's most prominent neocons. They're not making policy. They don't understand anything. They don't have huge audiences. They have no organic power. They're messengers and flack takers. They're the ones who get the abuse for the policies of others. Put some lunatic on TV. Rah! Everyone can hate him. But is he coming up with the plan? No, of course not. He's got a weekend show on Fox. But it's useful to watch what he says. In fact, the President of the United States himself has said this. Watch Mark Levin on Saturday night. You think Trump is dumb? You think he's doing this to juice Mark Levin's ratings? No. It's not possible to increase the ratings of someone nobody wants to watch. The point is to send a message. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's true. Levin's show, written probably not by Levin, which has almost no viewers, has been a place where the future is revealed in its broadest outline. It's a place to test ideas. It's a place to announce obliquely what's going to happen. And his most recent show should get you sitting bolt upright in your chair. And yes, this ran this weekend, Easter weekend, as if the defiling of beauty couldn't be more obvious. Easter week, could you pick another weekend to give the finger to Christianity other than Easter weekend? Apparently not. In fact, of course you couldn't. That's the point. Do it on Easter. Anyone who will accept this will accept any humiliation. In any case, here's what Mark Levin said on his Easter weekend show about what we ought to do next in Iran. Watch.
And the casualty numbers, as horrible as any casualty is, need some context. Let's look at World War II. The Battle of the Bulge, 80,000 to 90,000 plus casualties, deaths and injuries and so forth. Nearly 10% of all the casualties in World War II happened at the Battle of the Bulge near the end of the war. The Battle of Okinawa, 50,000 plus casualties, over 12,000, nearly 13,000 killed on that island, which is what convinced Truman that we would lose a million men if we didn't drop the atomic bombs that we did. So this is a war or a peace mission to stop nuclear weapons that can blow away millions of Americans. Every bit as important as World War II. This is a crucially important military operation, war, call it what you want, peace mission. And we ought to be celebrating the success of our military, unifying around our military and our commander-in-chief, and urging them to complete the task so our country is safe from nuclear weapons by insane, suicidal primitives from the 7th century.
Did you catch that? Did you make it through the whole clip? It's not easy. It's not easy, but embedded in there, and that's why we prefer a transcript over the actual audio, embedded in there is something you need to know. It's an argument that is being test-driven, and since no one, to our knowledge, has pushed back against it, may be in full operation now, it's an argument for nuclear weapons against Iran. And here's to restate, in case you couldn't make it through the accent, here's what he said. Nearly 10% of all casualties in the Second World War happened at the Battle of the Bulge, which, of course, at the end of the war. The Battle of Okinawa, 50,000 casualties, nearly 13,000 killed on that island, which is what convinced Truman, Harry Truman, the then president in 1945, we'd lose 1 million men if we didn't drop the atomic bombs that we did. Did you hear that? That's Mark Levin's counsel to our sitting president, Donald Trump, right now. You are looking at a choice between the catastrophic loss of your troops in a ground war or the use of nuclear weapons, which, in a sense, if you think about it, just think about it for a second, is actually an act of peace. It's an act of peace. The most humane thing you could do is to end this now with nuclear weapons. That's the case Mark Levin is making to the president, who just last week recommended that all Americans watch Mark Levin's show. Okay. This is not like crazy dot connecting here. This is one-to-one. This is really obvious where we're moving. And again, we're moving toward the use of weapons of indiscriminate mass destruction, possibly nuclear weapons, but non-conventional weapons. Not bombs dropped from the air, or missiles launched from launchers, but the use of weapons that have never been used in war ever. And the argument is the same argument that you heard in 1945, or didn't hear, by the way, if you're an American civilian. No one ever cuts you in on this. Thank heaven for Mark Levin saying it out loud so the rest of us can at least follow along and know what we're in for and implicated in. But the argument that it's actually much more humane to kill tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of civilians than it is to fight it out with the Marine Corps on the rocky shores of mainland Iran. That's the argument. But it's not just the argument that one guy in cable news is making. It is the logic of escalation in this war, because in some sense, Mark Levin is right. We are not going to open the straits with the United States Marine Corps, the 82nd Airborne, or the Tier 1 operators that everyone on cable news seems to know so much about. The Tier 1 operators, Tier 1. Just guys, some of the best guys actually in America could be killed in this. That's a better way to put it. It's a more real way to put it. They are not going to open the strait. And so unless somebody puts the brakes on right away, we're going to wind up in a place that we can't even imagine. Not just Iran, us and the rest of the world. And so that means, because this is obvious to anyone who's paying any attention, that if you work in the White House or in the U.S. military, now is time to say no, absolutely not. And say it directly to the president, no. In case you're thinking about using some weapon of mass destruction against the population of Iran, in whose name we liberated Iran, we killed their religious leader for their benefit. Do you remember that? This was last month. Those people who are in direct contact with the president need to say, no, I'll resign. I'll do whatever I can do legally to stop this, because this is insane. And if given the order, I'm not carrying it out. Figure out the codes on the football yourself, because everything hangs in the balance right now. This is not hysteria. This is 100% real. And yet the people in this country, by and large, are sleepwalking along. No, the future will be pretty much like today, maybe a little different. That's not the lesson of history. Things change fast and forever. There are pivot points where nothing is the same. And sometimes it's better, but mostly it's not. And this is one of those cases where it might not be at all better. But there's something else to think about, something maybe even more important than whether we have a nuclear war. What could be more important than that? Well, your soul, the way we worship God, whether we acknowledge God or not. That's more important ultimately than anything else. And you have to think through, could there be a spiritual component to what we're watching? Is it just a conventional escalation ladder in a badly thought out war with ill-defined goals, and we just wound up in this really tough place where we face either humiliation on the one side or a nuclear launch on the other? That's part of what it is, but could it be something bigger than that? Is it possible that what you're watching is a very stealthy yet incredibly effective attack on what, from a Christian perspective, is the true faith, belief in Jesus? Is that what really is under attack here? Maybe that's what's been under attack for a long time, maybe our whole lifetime. Maybe almost everything we see is an attack on that faith, the one faith that is always attacked, always and everywhere for 2,000 years. It's one. Many faiths have been attacked. Many religious people of different religions have been killed over the past 2,000 years. But there's been only one sustained effort to exterminate a faith, and that's the Christian faith. Could that be part of it? And is it possible that the president sees this not just in geostrategic terms, in military terms, in economic terms, got to open the strait? Okay. Is it possible the president sees this in bigger terms? Sees this as the fulfillment of something, or the elevation to some higher office beyond President of the United States? That's entirely possible. And that's not an attack, but it's also not a guess. Because at every turn since the inauguration last January, there have been religious leaders on the scene telling us out loud. Most of us ignored it because we're just so secular, we just sort of ignore it. Got some sleazy Southern Baptist preacher who says whatever for money. Okay, got it. We've ignored that this could actually be real. There's something going on here. And we shouldn't ignore that. We should always remember that just because we are a secular nation, have been overwhelmingly secular, maybe not coincidentally, since we dropped those atom bombs 80 years ago, doesn't mean that we live in a world where everyone else is secular. And it definitely doesn't mean that the spiritual realm has been eliminated, that is not real, that the only things that matter are the things that we can see and hear and feel and taste and measure. Talk about fake. Talk about a silly religion. That's the silly religion. In real life, in the life that every person lives, no matter what your religion or lack of it, there is a daily recurring experience of the transcendent, things you cannot explain or see or touch or feel or taste or measure. That is every bit as real. In fact, may be determinative. And maybe the most important things in your life are the things you don't fully understand. All of us know that. And so when people start making reference to mystical religious principles that we don't understand, it doesn't mean that it's fake. They may be getting it wrong, but it doesn't mean there's not something real at the center of this. Of course there is. And only a civilization as bereft of spiritual language as ours wouldn't pick up on that immediately. What do you mean, praise be to Allah?